Welcome to Risky Thoughts with Rob and Roy. My name's Roy,
And I'm Rob.
and this is episode 1, How to Listen. So we are two guys. We met about 10 years ago in university, and we have cultivated this relationship where we just love to talk. We love to talk about anything and everything. Nothing is off the tables. We're kind of like those old guys at a Tim Hortons just chatting away. You know, every city and every coffee shop, you see these kind of guys always kind of congregate, and they're kind of quoting Bible verses or philosophers or, you know, Donald Trump or politicians. And it's kind of, we try to embrace and participate in this kind of age-old tradition of talking, right? And not talking for the sake of talking, but talking to find the truth.
It's funny because I think we actually would be sometimes viewed as socially awkward because the types of topics that we enjoy and we have a passion to discuss are not what you find in pop culture. They're not typically what you would find in like the social element. But I think that they're far more interesting conversations. They're far more meaningful conversations. And I think that we certainly have developed a knack for finding the truth in the discussion points that we bring to the table. So
Finding truth. And a part of finding the truth and even talking
is listening.
is listening. That is the better half of talking, listening. And we want to be very careful in how we give you, the listeners, the instruction on how to listen to us. You know, we will say provocative things, and we know listeners who listen for the sake of just rebuttaling for no reason and just wanting to be right, and, you know, in essence wanting to be right. We come to this kind of podcast looking to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
And
It's quite the challenge for me. I have a very bad habit, or at least I should say I had a very bad habit. I am certainly getting better through the means of our conversations at just trying to listen and not always be right. Because I am definitely the guy that people just fucking hate at the end of a conversation because I just argue for the sake of arguing to be right.
yeah,
You know, but I find that when you and I talk, and especially when we talk about things that are a little bit deeper, I have a much more likely probability of truly listening to what you have to say. And I don't mind being wrong because I think our conversations do end up being far more successful, and there's something that is yielded at the end of the conversation that we can both take away. And it's completely contrary to my typical fashion of just like finding holes and being like, this is why you're wrong, this is why you're wrong, and therefore this is why I'm right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. This is what I perceive from our conversations and how they differ from my typical conversations on a daily basis.
fair enough.
And I hope that there are others out there that are just like me, and I'm sure there are a ton of people who would listen to this and they would think of somebody in their life that is 100% that guy. I am that guy out of the two of us sitting here. And I hope that someone can laugh and smile when they think of that person as I'm describing how I am as an individual and how difficult I'm sure I am to talk to on a normal basis. But
Right.
so I'll let you carry on, Roy.
So, like, you're definitely giving yourself a lot less credit in your description of your, I guess, arguing style, or even talking or listening or whatever you want to call it. You know, you are actually a lot more open than you think you are, right? And one of these kind of crucial elements is being open. You know, I could start talking about the universe and quantum theory, and, you know, we can, you know, most often not, you guys probably have conversations like this at home, maybe not about the universe or physics or politics, but there's always this leap of faith that you are taking in the other person's points that they're bringing up, right? Because at the end of the day, at least one of you need to be looking for the truth, right? So when with our conversations, there's been many times where you're really testing a theory. You know what I mean? You know, I was I'm currently in this kind of, I get ideologically possessed very easily. right? And I'm in this David Goggins mentality, and it's getting me results. I'm kind of leveraging this kind of go hard and running. I never thought I could run 8K. I was 230 pounds. Like, I've never ran, you know what I mean? But I started running, and I'm using that kind of ideology to push me forward. But, I was talking to Rob, and, he kind of really critiqued every point of it. But, once again, it's you're coming to the table and you're listening in the aims to be wrong, right? You want to be wrong because that's how you pivot and correct, and you get a more refined perspective on the world, right? We're coming onto this planet, we're trying to carve out meaning of the things around us, and you want to get it right.
Well, look, it's an age-old process, right? Like you said, it predates today's era where everybody is sort of technologically communicating and nobody's truly talking anymore.
No.
It's all about, and I mean, this is true for where we live. I think it's more true anyways where we live.
Yeah.
I think there are other parts of the world that may be far more connected on a social level in terms of not technologically socially connected, but in a talking connected sense, where people really truly are listening. They're very good listeners. Here we're terrible listeners, I think. Overall, North Americans are just, we're always too eager to jump the gun, too eager to move on to the next thing. So we have a very hard time really truly digesting conversation. So, but what I was trying to say from the beginning of this is that this is a very age-old idea of dialoguing, communicating, listening, and being open to being wrong. And it's funny because in religion, and I'm not necessarily a religious person, although as I'm getting older, I'm finding myself to, let's say I would disagree with my younger self more. Right. Let's put it that way. But that all aside, I think one of the fundamentals that they teach you in religion, I'm pretty sure this is true for most religions, at least from what I've learned in my world religions class many, many moons ago in high school, they require you to test your faith. You're always being told to test your faith, question it, dig deeper, doubt it, doubt yourself, doubt the beliefs that you have, put them to the test to some degree. And the whole purpose of it is to reinforce a more accurate representation of what you perceive to be true in the sense of, your religious beliefs. And I think it's very much alike to what you're describing now with respect to when you walk into a conversation. You walk into a conversation with the ambition of being right. It's no different than the person who's blindly going to believe in something and never even question its fundamentals, right? You can't be that person. There's no way for you to grow. There's no opportunity for your brain to actually absorb the information around it and make an educated decision on what your belief system is. And I think that's what the conversations that we have really do, is that you and I will approach each other and we may be feeling something, it could be about anything. In a more recent situation with our conversation, you had an incident with a woman, right? You had a relationship that had some troubles. It came to an end. And you then developed a belief system, from my perspective anyways, about all women. Yeah. Right? And you started to have this image of what women were like and how ruthless they are and how it's, they can make these decisions that'll just fucking run you over as a guy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. They don't think about the consequences. And when we started that conversation, it was, I guess you could say it was sort of like you getting shit off your chest and just talking to me.
Yeah.
And then as we kind of progressed through the conversation, I think, we kind of realized and recognized that, look, men are just as ruthless,
Absolutely.
Men make just as shitty decisions. And it just gives you an opportunity to really take a step back. And that's the whole point of having a conversation.
Yeah.
You want to be able to go up to somebody and hear their side of the story because it's just a different angle than the one that you've heard. I don't know if you've ever watched the movie. It was called Vantage Point. Did you ever watch this movie?
No.
So the movie was like 8 different people witnessing an assassination of a president.
Oh, wow.
And so the whole purpose of the movie was for you to see the incident from the 8 angles and see how twisted the story can be from one perspective.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Like the person number 1, for example, would be like, oh, this is where the shooter must have been, that's who it had to be. And like from their perspective, when you see the movie through their lens, it seems logical. It's like that actually makes sense. But then you see vantage point 2 and vantage point 3 and vantage point 4. And once you combine all 8 vantage points, again, it's not 8. I don't remember. This movie's it's a very old movie. I haven't seen it in a very long time. But once you combine the collective image from all 8 vantage points, you have a much more refined understanding of the truth. Right? And I think it's a very good representation of how conversations will bring you to the same place.
Yeah. Dissecting, and just taking a step back here, a lot of what you did in that breakup phase was that you were actually leveraging empathy to listen to me, right? So you're listening to me and you're like, okay, he's probably feeling this, he's probably feeling that, he's probably feeling that, and only when you're there you can provide the talker words that he'll kind of understand, right? And feeling at that moment, right? Even identifying with those current ideologies, because these are we've mentioned already 2 ideologies here. You know, this idea of MGTOW, right? You know, like this kind of resent towards women, and this is all their fault. But you know, then the David Goggins, right? But when we're talking about it, we're able, by listening and using, by active listening, right, and using empathy and logic, you know, we were able to kind of shift and disprove a lot of these ideas, and that, you know, a lot of these ideas just kind of that were wrong with my thinking, it kind of all laid within myself, right? It's like, you know, the hatred I had, or like this, not hatred, you know, that's a very strong word, but the resent I had towards, you know, all women going through like a major breakup, you know, it was actually just a resent towards myself, you know, but anyways, we'll definitely get into those, like that, those kind of nuanced stories later. But once again, you know, you leverage like empathy and logic. So we're talking about like how to listen at the end of the day, right? And those are 2 very important elements that you must, you know, embody when you're coming into like a discussion or any sort of talk, right? If we are using too much logic, then we're kind of missing the boat, right? Because the idea is like, why are we talking in the first place? Like, why are we talking in the first place? This is a question like we you know, we haven't covered yet. And what's your opinion on that? Like, why do we even talk in the first place? You know?
Are you saying you and I, or are you just saying people in general?
I think people in general, people, you know, maybe even just you can compare it to the why we talk. We've kind of been very clear. We talk to find some truth about like our life and existence. But
well, I don't think that communication started from the necessity to find truth. I think maybe in some way you could actually say that it technically was, but I think the whole purpose of initial, you know, signs of communication were to signal information. You were relaying information that was pertinent to the physical atmosphere that you were living in. So, for example, if there was danger, right, for a person that was in the proximity of someone that you would have associated as a, let's call it a partner for survival, you know, in the days when it was all about just surviving, I think you needed to learn to communicate, to say, hey, watch out, there's a fucking animal behind you, you know, keep your head up. Then there was, you know, communication about like, I'm hungry, you know, communicating a desire or a need that would help preserve your life, that would help keep you alive. I think these are the fundamentals behind the original signs of communication, and these are kinds of communication that even a dog has. You step on a dog's foot, he's gonna bark, or he's gonna make a fucking really high pitched noise because you're hurting him, and that vocalization of that pain is just a representation of the physical environment. I think things certainly evolved, obviously, into far more complex reasons for communicating. We are definitely not just physical creatures. We are far more sophisticated than that. There's a lot of emotional well-being and social well-being that needs to be maintained in order for our, I guess, our bodies and minds to sort of to have this cohesion that allows us to continue to survive. happily and healthily. And so I think once we got to a stage where we started involving, emotion and the requirement to bond with another person in order to better our chances of survival, we started developing the necessity to communicate on a different level, and we definitely made it far more difficult to listen. See, the communicating on the vocalizing part, I think, was easier. I think it's the listening part that was very challenging as we evolved, because it's very easy and instinctual. Like that dog screaming when you stepped on his foot. It doesn't have to think about that. You know what I mean? It's just like instinct. It's a reflex.
Yeah.
It makes noise because there's problem. Just like when there's an animal attacking, you make noise out of necessity. It's just it's a reflex.
Okay, so I guess then my question was wrong. Then I don't want to ask why do we talk, because that's an exact answer. Like, it's to communicate information. My kind of quarrel here is that there are so many different little spheres of knowledges and perspectives all over the internet. MGTOW and this go hard, stay hard type of stuff. That's just two of maybe like hundreds,
endless
of thousands.
Amounts.
Yeah,
Sure.
and endless amounts, right? I do think they're finite. But my question is, like, there are people out there who will talk and kind of put down other perspectives, right? And I feel they do this because they want to kind of make sure that their perspective is the right perspective, and I'm kind of doing the little quotations there, and they'll defend it with their life. I am of the opinion that that's not good, right? In a sense, for truth finding, because you get stuck in that.
You're putting yourself in a box. Right?
You're putting yourself in a box, and that you're kind of subscribing to all those rules, and you're, and like if in my opinion, if you are part of the whole MGTOW, like, it is a very resentful thing, right? Only now I'm starting to watch some videos that they're actually trying to get out of this whole hating. You know what I mean? Like, they're trying to look for how do we, because right now the reality is there is a kind of like the relationship between men and women in Western societies is definitely in flux, right? Like we're in that, like, that dialectic, and the pendulum is shifting, right? And we are just unfortunately, in that flux, and things are going to be chaotic and things are going to be wrong, right? And people are trying to come up with different perspectives, but certain perspectives I've noticed when I get kind of into one of them, like, they don't provide me with that emotional homeostasis. There's obviously that little bit of resent or a little bit of confusion or whatever it is, but the point is, like, the person who's on the other side of this kind of podcast listening, I want to give them some sort of like a string of words for them to understand that we're all subject to this kind of these different perspectives, and I want to make sure that they are open enough to accept the things that we're saying, rather than just kind of beat it down.
So would you say that in order to be a good listener, or in order to productively listen, that synonymous with being open? Or is being open just one element of many criteria that define a true good listening session?
Okay.
Because now, we're getting very technical, and we're really trying to see what we're ultimately getting to now, Roy, is what we normally do with our conversations.
Yeah.
We start with this huge, wide spectrum of conversation, and then it finally narrows itself down to what the real question that we're trying to ask is. And I think that real question is exactly what we started the podcast and titled it, which is how to listen. Yeah. And I think we need to now qualify the metrics that define what good listening is.
Yeah.
So I think that my opinion is that openness is definitely one. You have to be open-minded.
Yeah.
You cannot go into a conversation thinking that you have the answer. Right. It is absolutely unproductive for both parties. I think number 2 is you have to be able to take the information that's being told to you. This is it's going to sound really stupid and simple, but you truly have to listen. Like when someone's talking to you, don't just let it be lips moving and noise coming out of their mouth. You have to take their information, process what their information is telling you, and then derive some form of a, you can call it like
you have to decode what they're
Yes.
saying. Like decoding is a huge part of it, right? And you have to decode that accurately. So it's just like when you hear certain words like MGTOW, if I say the word MGTOW, like it can be very easily misunderstood that just because Roy said MGTOW, Roy's part of MGTOW. We hate him. And then you have to be very careful of even attaching the connotations, to me. You know what I mean? Because we're looking for the truth, right? So we're going to say provocative things, hence the name Risky Thoughts, right? But they're not really that risky. They may be seemed and perceived as risky.
well,
but
that's just it. It's about perception.
it's about perception.
And
right?
I think that is the third piece of the puzzle, which is not only do you have to hear what they're saying, you need to hear what they're saying from their perspective. See, a perfect example of this is I'm married. For the audience, you don't know who Rob is. I'm married. I have a child. But the most important part of this is that I'm married. And for anybody out there who is married listening to this, I'm sure there is certainly been a time in your life and your relationship where you've had a disagreement with your partner. I think it's obviously a very common thing. Nobody goes through a relationship, in a fairy tale sense. There's always going to be tough times. And, very recently, my wife and I have had a few disagreements that kind of got a little bigger than what I thought they were. And the reality was, she would say something to me that would indicate that she was having a level of frustration that derived from some of my actions or my lack of actions or whatever the case is. And my initial response, because this is the paradigm I live in, this is the lens I see things through, is always from a very practical perspective. This is not an exact example, but she may say something like, "Oh, you didn't cut the grass. You said you were going to cut the grass." Right? And I'm looking at it from a practical standpoint saying, well, whether I cut the grass yesterday or I cut the grass tomorrow, it's not going to change my life. It's not going to change her life. It's not going to change my son's life.
Right.
It's an irrelevant point. Like, what is the problem here? Like, why is it such a big deal? The problem is I didn't hear that message through her lens. And her lens, it wasn't even about the grass being cut. She didn't give a shit whether the grass was cut or not. The perspective that she was saying it from was that you're not standing up to the things that you say you're going to do.
Yes.
And you're not executing on those promises.
Yeah.
They may be insignificant, some of them.
Yeah.
Some of them are far more significant.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, the perspective that she has of me as an individual, like from a high level, is that this person is not a person of integrity. He doesn't stand up for what he believes in.
Yeah.
He doesn't live by the words that he speaks.
Yeah, man.
And I did not see it from that perspective when she said specifically, because that's what I'm saying. Like, yes, I heard her say that I didn't cut the grass. What I didn't really truly hear was you're not doing what you say you're going to do.
Oh, 100%. It's because we're males and we did like engineering and math and sciences, things are all kind of spelled out. There's no need for like a poetic approach to it where we have to analyze the author, right? And once again, this is all going back to, and we can just sum it up for simplicity, empathy, right? We need to understand who is delivering this message to us, right? And we're not saying anything, we're not saying they're less analytical or not. It's just people are going to use their own language that they are comfortable with, right? And us as guys, in not locker room talk, but when we're talking, we're always talking about our girlfriends. And I'm the same way. Like, there were some rails that they bought at Home Depot, and I didn't put up the rails for almost like a year. There's just one little section left, and she's just like, she kept asking, and it's the same thing. It's just like, you said you're gonna do it, you're not gonna do it, and we have to take the step personally rather than blame and say you're not articulate enough, you're not this, you know what I mean? There's a whole plethora of people out there who don't value what we do, how we talk, right? And they're surviving. You know what I mean? So who's to say which way is better, right? We're not even talking about that. We're just saying that different people are going to communicate differently, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it is our kind of job to decode the message, number one, like the actual content of it, but then also to understand the author of who's ever talking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that requires empathy, right? So when you're listening to us, and obviously right now you don't know too much about me and Rob, so you know,
It's hard to hear where we're coming from
yeah,
ultimately.
it's hard to understand where we're really coming from, but we're trying to be as articulate as we possibly can here. But that's just a little bit of a kind of synopsis of like how to listen, right?
Yeah, I think there's one thing I do want to say. Given this is our first episode and we have to improve, obviously, on our ability to, deliver a reasonable product for podcasting purposes. But I think ultimately where we tried to start this thing off was we just wanted to be able to have a conversation with each other, put a
Mm-hmm.
microphone in front of us,
Yeah.
and allow that to be the product. And
Yeah.
obviously we are doing that to some degree, but at the same time, I think you and I are both cognizant that there's a microphone in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
We are both cognizant of the fact that this may go out to the public and people are going to listen to it. So it is kind of shifting the dynamic of our conversations. Maybe we're not as, I don't know, efficient in our ways of discussing things when we have the microphone in front of us. I think that'll get better with time. So I just want people to understand that, this being our first opportunity at making a product that delivered to the public, don't judge us based on that alone. But hopefully you are able to, listen and hear, the way that Roy and I try to communicate and think through our conversations and end up at a place where we both feel comfortable that we've found an answer to a given question, through the mechanisms of communicating, I would call this via the Socratic method, right? Just talking about it and questioning each other. We didn't do a lot of questioning each other on this particular topic, but
No, because we're just trying to establish, like, well, essentially, I think I wanted to lead this into an area of like, what's the value proposition here? Like, what does the listener get out of our discussions and our kind of arguments and our, you know, analysis or psychoanalysis of our experiences and our decision making and our perspectives? Like, what do you think they get out of this? Like,
yeah, that's a
and
good question. Well, I mean, we won't be able to answer it. Only they will.
yeah, 100%. You know what I mean? Like, we're not promising anything here, but we're definitely. I can tell you just from our own experience that these conversations are extremely valuable. Like
Mm-hmm.
for me at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, hopefully, once again, that you can take this out to your own life. There's been many people where I've come in contact, family and friends, where I've kind of benefited them with like just trying to be a little bit more empathetic and just how to listen,
Mm-hmm.
providing that skill just by leading by example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we kind of did somewhat do our little thing where we go on tangents somewhere in between there. Where we talked about a number of different things, and I think some of them can actually be their own episode where we can talk completely about communicating with your wife or something like that. But I think ultimately, it's the purpose of these things, as you've described, is that ultimately we want someone out there to be able to take our conversations and perhaps hear something that sounds similar to an experience that they've gone through or are going through, and perhaps maybe learn from some of our mistakes, because part of our conversations is that we will discuss actions that we have taken, actions that we think we should take, all this kind of stuff, and then start with a set of circumstances and what the results are based on our actions, and hopefully those experiences and those actions will yield something positive for somebody out there, and save them some trouble that we put ourselves through.
Yep. So I guess that's episode 1.
All right, guys, thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you
Hopefully
very
see you
much.
next time.